A man rescues a blind kitten during his vacation, but he gets the shock of his life days after he adopts the blind cat. How far would anyone go to save a helpless animal? The steady hum of the airplane's engines filled the cabin as Mantes settled into his seat, carefully adjusting the small carrier on his lap. Inside, a tiny kitten named Skunky slept peacefully, oblivious to the momentous journey it was about to undertake. Mantes glanced around nervously, half expecting someone to challenge his decision to bring this fragile creature on board. As the plane began to taxi, Mantes felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration wash over him. The past 2 weeks have been a whirlwind of sleepless nights, worried consultations with veterinarians, and frantic preparations for this very moment. He still couldn't quite believe he was doing this, flying home with a blind kitten he'd found on the streets of Italy. The flight attendant paused by his seat, her eyes softening as she noticed the carrier. "What a sweet little thing," she said softly. "What's its name?" "Skunky," Mantes replied with a worn smile, "because of the white stripe in her fur." The flight attendant chuckled. "How adorable. Have a safe flight, both of you." As the plane took off, Mantes leaned back in his seat, his mind drifting back to how this unexpected adventure had begun. 2 weeks earlier, the warm Italian sun beat down on Mantes as he strolled through the winding cities of a small coastal town in southern Italy. It was his first real vacation in years, and he was determined to soak in every moment of relaxation. The quaint buildings and breathtaking views of the Mediterranean were exactly what he needed to escape the stress of his life back home. As he rounded a corner, a faint sound caught his attention. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but as he paused to listen, he realized it was coming from a narrow alley between 2 buildings. Curiosity piqued, Mantes ventured into the shadowy passage. There, huddled against a crumbling stone wall, was a tiny kitten. Its fur was matted and dirty, and it mewed pitifully. Its cries were barely audible. Mantes's heart clenched at the sight. He kneeled down, reaching out slowly to avoid startling the fragile creature. "Hey there, little one," he murmured softly. "What are you doing out here all alone?" As the hand gently brushed the kitten's head, he noticed something odd. The kitten didn't react to his touch, continuing to mew plaintively and paw at the air. With growing concern, Mantes carefully scooped up the tiny animal and cradled it in his hands. It was then that he saw the kitten's eyes. They were clouded over, unfocused, and didn't seem to register his presence at all. With a jolt of realization, Mantes understood. The little cat was blind. For a moment he hesitated. He was only in Italy for another week, and he certainly hadn't planned on taking in a stray animal. But as the kitten nestled into his palm, seeking warmth and comfort, Mantes knew he couldn't just leave it there to fend for itself. "All right, little one," he said softly. "Let's get you somewhere safe." Mantes tucked the kitten into his jacket and hurried back to his rented villa. His mind raced with questions and concerns. What did blind kittens need? How was he going to care for it? And what would he do when it was time to return home? As soon as he arrived at the villa, Mantes called his brother, who was staying with him for the vacation but had gone out on his own. "I need your help," he said as soon as his brother answered the phone. "I found a kitten and it's blind. We need to figure out what to do." His brother, always the more practical of the two, sighed. "Mantes, we can't keep a cat. We're leaving in a week, remember?" I know, Mantes replied, frustration creeping into his voice. "But I couldn't just leave it there. It would have died." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Finally, his brother spoke. "Okay, let me make some calls. There's got to be a vet nearby who can help." The nearest veterinary clinic that could handle such a case was an hour's drive away. Mantes didn't hesitate. He bundled the kitten into a makeshift carrier, a cardboard box lined with a soft towel, and set off immediately. At the clinic, a kind-faced veterinarian examined the kitten thoroughly. Her expression grew more serious with each passing moment, and Mantes felt his heart sink. "I'm afraid the news isn't good," the vet said softly. "The kitten is severely malnourished and has a severe eye infection that has caused blindness. There are also signs of other infections, including in the ears. To be honest, the chances of survival are extremely low." Mantes felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "But there has to be something we can do," he pleaded. "We can't just give up on her." The vet's eyes softened at his determination. "We can try," she said, "but you need to understand that it will be a difficult journey. The kitten will need round-the-clock care, medication, and a lot of patience. Are you prepared for that?" Without hesitation, Mantes nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." And so began Mantes's crash course in kitten care. The vet showed him how to feed the tiny cat with a syringe, administer medication, and clean its eyes and ears. She provided him with a detailed care plan and enough supplies to last the week. "Remember," she cautioned as Mantez prepared to leave, "this kitten needs to eat every 4 hours, day and night. It's going to be exhausting, but it's her only chance." Mantez left the clinic with a mix of determination and fear. He knew the odds were stacked against them, but he was resolved to give this little kitten every chance at life. Back at the villa, his brother was waiting anxiously. When Mantez explained the situation, his expression cycled through disbelief, concern, and finally, resigned acceptance. For the next few days, Mantez and his brother's vacation turned into an around-the-clock kitten nursery. They took turns feeding the baby cat every 4 hours, administering medication, and cleaning her eyes and ears. To keep the kitten warm, Mantez even made a small heating pad from a water bottle wrapped in a towel. Progress was painfully slow. The kitten seemed to hover between life and death. There were moments of hope, like when she finally began to purr softly during feedings, and moments of despair, like when she refused to eat or seemed too weak to move. On the third night, Mantez woke up for the 2 a.m. feeding to find the kitten alarmingly still. Panic seized him as he gently lifted her from her box. Her tiny body was cool to the touch, and for a heart-stopping moment, he thought she had died. But then, miraculously, he felt a faint heartbeat. Mantez sprang into action, warming the kitten against his chest and preparing her food with shaking hands. For the next hour, he sat up with her, coaxing her to take tiny sips of the fortified kitten formula the vet had provided. Slowly, painfully slowly, the kitten began to respond. Her breathing became stronger, and she even managed to swallow a full feeding. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow through the villa's windows, Mantez felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this little fighter had a chance after all. Days passed in a blur of feedings, medications, and cautious optimism. Mantez and his brother fell into a routine, tag-teaming the kitten's care while trying to salvage some semblance of their vacation. They took turns venturing out into the town, always hurrying back for the next feeding or dose of medicine. To their amazement, the kitten began to show signs of improvement. Her fur, once dull and matted, started to regain its luster. She gained weight, and her ribs were no longer painfully visible beneath her skin. And while her eyes remained clouded and unseeing, she became more active, exploring her box with curious paws and responding to their voices with tiny mews. One time, while exploring, Mantez noticed something odd about the kitten's fur. As she stretched out in a patch of sunlight, he saw a distinctive white stripe running down her back, contrasting sharply with her otherwise dark fur. "Well, would you look at that?" Mantez chuckled. "You look like a little skunk." His brother, who was nearby, laughed. "Skunky," he said. "That's what we should call her." And so, the tiny blind kitten became Skunky, a name that seemed to fit her spunky personality perfectly. As the end of their vacation loomed, Mantez faced a difficult decision. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving Skunky behind, but taking her back home seemed impossible. He spent hours researching international pet travel regulations, his heart sinking at the complex requirements and potential risks for such a fragile animal. The night before their departure, Mantez sat on the villa's terrace and Skunky curled up in his lap. The moon hung low over the Mediterranean, casting a silver path across the water. He stroked the cat's soft fur, marveling at how attached he'd become to this tiny creature in just a week. "What am I going to do with you, little Skunky?" he murmured. As if in response, Skunky stretched and yawned, her paw reaching out to rest on Mantez's hand. At that moment, he knew he couldn't leave her behind. They would face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The next morning was a whirlwind of activity. Mantez made frantic calls to airlines, veterinarians, and pet transport services. By some miracle, and with a considerable dent in his savings account, he managed to arrange for Skunky to travel with him as an in-cabin pet. As the plane now soared through the sky, Mantez found himself reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had led him to this point. He thought about the long, sleepless nights, the worry, and the moments of joy when Skunky showed signs of improvement. The flight seemed to stretch on endlessly, with Mantez constantly checking on his tiny charge. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the plane touched down. As Mantez made his way through customs, he held his breath, praying that there wouldn't be any issues with bringing Skunky into the country. To his relief, the process went smoothly, and soon he was stepping out of the airport and into a taxi, the carrier clutched tightly to his chest. The ride home was a blur, with Mantez's mind racing through all the things he needed to do to prepare his apartment for its new resident. As he unlocked his front door, a wave of exhaustion washed over him. The past 2 weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, and the stress of the journey home had taken its toll. Carefully, he set the carrier down in the living room and opened the door. Skunky poked her head out cautiously, her nose twitching as she took in the new scents. Mantez watched in amazement as she slowly emerged from the carrier, her movements hesitant but determined. Despite her blindness, Skunky's personality began to blossom as she grew stronger. She was curious and playful, fearlessly exploring her new home. Mantez was amazed at how she navigated with her other senses, following his voice and using her whiskers to avoid obstacles. He and his brother, who visited often to check on Skunky's progress, even taught her to navigate around the house based on the sound of their footsteps and a few hand claps. It was amazing to watch her learn and adapt, her other senses sharpening to compensate for her lack of sight. One evening, days after bringing Skunky home, Mantez was working on his computer with the cat curled up beside him. He had been so focused on his project that he hadn't noticed the time slipping by. Suddenly, he felt a gentle pat on his arm. Looking down, he saw Skunky sitting up, her paw outstretched towards him. For a moment, he was confused. Then, he glanced at the clock and realized it was past her usual dinner time. "Oh, Skunky," he laughed, scooping her up. "You clever girl. Did you just remind me it's time to eat?" As if in response, Skunky let out a soft meow and headbutted his chin affectionately. Mantez felt a warmth spread to his chest. This little blind cat, against all odds, was not just surviving but thriving. He carried her to the kitchen, talking to her softly as he prepared her food. As he set the bowl down, something caught his eye. Skunky, instead of relying solely on her sense of smell as she usually did, seemed to be looking directly at the bowl. Mantez was shocked, barely daring to breathe. Could this be possible? He waved his hand slowly in front of Skunky's face, and to his amazement, her eyes tracked the movement. His heart racing, Mantez quickly called his veterinarian and described what he had seen. The vet advised him to bring Skunky in immediately for a checkup. The next day, as the vet examined Skunky's eyes, Mantez held his breath. After what seemed like an eternity, the vet turned to him with a smile. "Mr. Mantez," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I can hardly believe it, but it appears that Skunky's vision is returning. It's not perfect and she may never have full sight, but there's definitely improvement." Mantez felt tears welling up in his eyes. "How is this possible?" he asked, his voice choking with emotion. The vet shook her head in amazement. Sometimes, in cases where blindness is caused by infection rather than a congenital defect, there can be improvement as the body heals. But I've never seen such a dramatic recovery, especially after so long. Skunky is truly a little miracle. Looking down at Skunky, who was now peering curiously out of her carrier at the passing scenery, Mantez realized that in trying to rescue her, he had ended up rescuing a part of himself he didn't know was missing. Skunky let out a soft meow, rubbing her head against his hand. Then, in a move that left Mantez breathless, she gracefully leapt onto the couch, something she had never been able to do before without careful positioning and encouragement. In the days that followed, Mantez watched in awe as Skunky's world expanded. With her newfound vision, she explored their home with renewed enthusiasm, discovering details she had only known through touch and sound before. Her favorite pastime became sitting by the window, watching dark shadows move outside, a simple pleasure that never failed to bring a smile to Mantez's face. He knew she couldn't make out the shape of squirrels and birds, but she seemed to enjoy tracking their movements nonetheless, and he was glad she'd found a new reason to love life. Friends and family who had been skeptical about Mantez's decision to adopt a blind kitten were now amazed by Skunky's transformation. She had become a living testament to the power of love, care, and perseverance. Mantez's brother, who had been there from the beginning, visited often. During one such visit, he watched Skunky navigate the apartment with ease, jumping onto surfaces and playing with toys as any sighted cat would. His usually serious face crumpled as he marveled at her progress, and Mantez could swear he'd seen him wipe a tear from his eyes. As the months passed, Skunky's story began to spread. Mantez started a blog to document their journey, sharing photos and updates about her progress. To his surprise, their story resonated with people from all over the world. Messages poured in from fellow pet owners, animal lovers, and people facing their own challenges, all inspired by Skunky's resilience. The journey between Mantez and Skunky was far from over. There would be more adventures, more challenges, and undoubtedly more surprises along the way. But whatever the future held, they would face it together. A man and his miracle cat, forever bonded by an act of kindness that had set them both on a path to healing, growth, and unexpected joy. As the city lights twinkled outside their hotel window, Mantez and Skunky slept peacefully, their extraordinary story a reminder to all who heard it that sometimes the greatest miracles come in the smallest packages and that a little love and faith can truly change the world. Mantez's decision to rescue a blind kitten led to an extraordinary journey of love, hope, and miraculous recovery. Have you ever experienced an unexpected encounter that changed your life in a profound way? Share your experience in the comments below, and thank you for listening to this heartwarming tale. Join us for more exciting stories like this one.